Hello, my name is Alexandria Jones, and today I'm going to be presenting on social media addiction in teens. I know that I've stated at least a couple times in class my interest in this specific topic, so I'm excited to dive in today to be presenting on this topic. Let's go ahead and get started. Let's first talk about what is social media addiction. Social media addiction is a compulsive behavior in which a person spends excessive time on social media. Often, um, they are choosing to be on social media instead of interacting in like real world relationships or activities. It is a form of technology addiction and it can have a negative impact on mental health, as we will talk about as we continue with the presentation. So, this has become a growing concern. Research suggests that social media addiction in teens can lead to like anxiety and depression, and it can also have decreased self esteem. And it can also lead to cyberbullying and other negative behaviors, and that is according to YaleMedicine.org. So it's important to understand and address social media addiction because it's crucial for promoting the teen's mental well being and preventing potential negative consequences such as anxiety, depression, cyberbullying, and low self esteem. So, I believe that by raising awareness and implementing effective interventions, we can help teenagers develop healthier relationships with technology and improve their overall quality of life. So, let's talk about some statistics and some data of the prevalence and then the impact. The graphs that you see before you are from an article that is called Associations Between Screen Time and Lower Psychological Well-Being among Children and Adolescents. So, I just want to talk about some of the findings of this article. Among ages 14 to 17 years old, it was found that high users of screens, so those that are averaging more than 7 hours a day, were more than twice as likely to ever have been diagnosed with depression, diagnosed with anxiety, treated by a mental health professional, or have taken medication for a psychological or behavior issues in the last 12 months. Those that had moderate use of screens, so averaging about 4 hours a day, were associated with lower psychological well being. Social media addiction can lead to a decrease in academic performance as well, as teens may be spending so much time on social media that they are not able to focus on their studies. Additionally, social media addiction can cause teens to become isolated and disconnected from the real world. And I just want to go through each of these graphs and talk about them a little bit. So we're going to start over here with this graph. This graph is measuring how much the child argues, and how they're correlating that with the total screen time. So if we're looking at the extreme amount, 7+ hours, you can see that is the highest of them arguing too much. And that is for all age groups. So from 14 to 17, from ages 11 to 13, and then from 6 to 10 as well. The graph in the middle is measuring anxiety and depression diagnosis. And again, those that are spending more than 7 hours on screen have higher average of diagnosis between anxiety and depression. Lastly, This is measuring those that do not finish tasks that they started. And again, 7+ hours have the highest amount of unfinished tasks. And so you can see there's a pattern here for those teens, those children that are having a lot of screen time during the day. Okay, let's talk about some behavioral patterns of social media addiction. Behavioral patterns of social media addiction include excessive time spent on social media platforms, constantly checking for notifications, difficulty in reducing or stopping social media use, neglecting other important activities, and experiencing withdrawal symptoms when unable to access social media. These patterns can have detrimental effects on mental health and overall well being. And I wanted to bring forth another study. This study is the relationship between addictive use of social media, narcissism, and self esteem. And so I wanted to talk about those findings. Excuse me. The main objective of this study was to examine the association between addictive use of social media, narcissism, and self esteem. In this study, they use the Bergen Social Media Addiction Scale, the Narcissistic Personality Inventory 16, and the Rosenberg Self-Esteem Scale. So the results show that being a woman of lower age, not being in a relationship, being a student, lower education, lower income, lower self-esteem, and narcissism were associated with higher scores of the Bergen Social Media Addiction Scale. These findings support that addictive social media use reflects the need to feed the ego. And it is also a way to inhibit or stop negative self-evaluation, so referring to the self-esteem. This study indicates that women may tend to develop more addictive use of activities involving social media interaction than men. So when we talk about these behavioral patterns, they're more prevalent in young women than they are in young men. That's not to say that this doesn't happen with young men as well, but it's more likely to happen in with young women, with young teen girls. Okay, so now I have a video that I would like to share with you. It came out last year, and it is about youth mental health crisis and answering the question, or attempting to answer the question, does social media negatively impact teen mental health? So let's find out.
We're in the middle of a youth mental health crisis in America. This is the defining public health challenge of our time, and I'm very concerned that social media has become an important contributor to the pain and struggles that many of our young people are facing.
The question that everyone wants to answer is, does social media negatively impact mental health?
We have to remember that social media is not one thing. It's depending on who you're talking to, what content you're seeing, what functions you're interacting with, a like button, for instance.
The impact social media platforms like Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok have on the public, notably teens, is unquestioned. But what's still at play is how much of that impact is negative.
We saw a big decrease in teen mental health, increase in depression, which was pretty well time locked to when social media got really big and when it became super engaging.
That year or two, as puberty is just beginning, is the second most important time for adolescent brain development, reorganization, for our entire lives. And there's a lot of growth and a lot of changes that are happening at the precise time that we're actually handing them a device that we know makes their brain react in unexpected and dramatic ways. Two things that happen to occur at the same time are not causally related to one another. So we can see some mechanistic pieces and some signs, but we can't make causal statements as scientists.
In a recent CDC study from 2011 to 2021, when social media use was booming, the percentage of teen girls who reported persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness increased by nearly 60%.
It's hard to do an experiment that fully captures the effect of Facebook and all of the network effects where, me being on Facebook affects my friends. It's just really hard to study.
We don't want to wait until we have the most conclusive proof that demonstrates with causality what the harms will be. Because the time that it takes for science to do that kind of work will lose an entire generation or two.
Despite that sentiment, a study released last month from the University of Oxford found no evidence linking individual Facebook data to a negative well-being. That study, however, was specifically for Facebook, not Instagram, where the demographic tends to skew younger.
Unfortunately, the state of data sharing in 2023 is worse than it was in 2022 and 2021. Companies have largely sort of en masse closed databases and APIs that were used by academics to understand what sort of behavior was like on the platforms.
API, or Application Programming Interface, allows third parties to communicate with its product. In the past year, Reddit has started charging for API integration, and X, formerly known as Twitter, has largely shut down its access.
Very few platforms are more open today than they have been in the past. I would pass legislation to make data access a lot easier and more robust so that we can get answers in real time, to have the evidence that they need in order to do their work sort of effectively.
We'll ever know whether social media was net good or net bad. I think it was probably net good, to be honest. And I think we have pretty strong evidence that even if it might have been net good for most people on average, it seems to have been net bad for teenagers, particularly teenagers, say, from, age 10 to 14.
This is a time when we're saying as a community, we have to pay attention, we have to do something different immediately, and this is an urgent scenario right now.
When reached for comment, Meta, which owns Facebook and Instagram, Google, which owns YouTube, and TikTok, all stressed the importance of teen mental health and highlighted the measures each platform is taking to restrict content and safeguard teen well-being.
Hi everyone, George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage,
So I really enjoyed that video because me personally, it does sparks my interest. It brings a lot of questions for me that I would love to dive into. But one thing I wanted to point out was one of the speakers mentioned that because it is so new and social media being so new, yet so prevalent, we don't have the answers to the effects of what it will happen in the future with teens that are growing up with social media. We can only speak to the increase of I'm so sorry, I'm blanking. The increase of depression and anxiety, and we can also correlate that to increase of social media, but we cannot make causation, not until he said another generation or two. And yet, while that is happening, that doesn't mean that we don't do anything until we have those findings. It's still very important to make sure that we are being proactive as we are noticing these changes that are happening with the teens and yet we can still continue to research. Let's continue with the presentation. And we're going to talk about some effects, cognitive and physical effects of social media addiction. With social media addiction, there are cognitive development challenges, due to excessive social media use, attention span deficits, and multitasking difficulties among teenagers, poor health overall. So there's another study that I wanted to talk about. It is the relationship between media and technology use and how it impacts the health of children, preteens, and teenagers. And those findings are preteens specific technology uses, including video gaming and electronic communication, predicted poor health. And for teenagers, nearly every type of technological activity predicted poor health. And it is measuring poor health on the amount of exercise and their eating habits. Okay, now moving on to some intervention strategies. Before we go into those intervention strategies, I did want to mention some things that I read in this article called Adolescent Mental Health in the Digital Age, Facts, Fears, and Future Directions. This article suggests that there are still unanswered questions regarding social media intake with teens, and they suggest that we shouldn't look into the amount of time spent on social media, but focus on the behaviors in the teens. And so I appreciate this article because it is acknowledging that social media is here and we cannot just get rid of it, but we do need to just understand that it is a part of our lives and a major part of the teens' lives. And so the focus is really how can we create and foster a better relationship with teens to have a more healthy relationship with social media. And so there are a couple ways that we can intervene. The first is parental and educational interventions to prevent and manage social media addiction. So parents taking more initiative in what their children are being exposed to online, maybe having more restrictions, maybe having more conversations, and again, and also within schools, teaching more education around social media and how it can affect you and how you can have a better relationship with social media. Another intervention is having strategies to promote digital literacy and being responsible with teens. And I can speak for myself as a middle school teacher. This past year, especially, I took once a week to talk to my students about social media use and how social media can be good. I think with my students, when teachers or adults talk about social media, it's often seen as like this bad thing, and it is not always a bad thing. It can be a very positive thing. It just depends on how we are utilizing and how we are letting what we see online affect how we feel about ourselves. So just taking the time to have those open, honest conversations so that teens can be more responsible with how they handle themselves online and with others that they interact with on social media. Okay. I would like to talk about a learning activity that I created on understanding social media addiction. And so The purpose behind this is just to raise awareness with teens about the signs, symptoms, and impacts of social media addiction and to promote strategies for healthy social media use. So this is how this activity would go. So first we'll start with an introduction where we're discussing current social media trends. Then the speaker, whoever is conducting this, would show statistics and facts of social media among teens specifically. Then, as a group, you'll discuss how teens in a case study are affected. I was not able to find a real professional case study on this specific topic. So for the purposes of this activity, I would probably create a hypothetical case study and have the teens discuss it either way. After the case study is discussed, teens will have opportunity to reflect on the connection between their mood and social media usage and probably how they relate to the case study as well. After that, the teens will also get an opportunity to develop specific goals to promote healthy social media use. Okay. There's one more article that I enjoyed reading and I wanted to include it in this presentation. It is called 10 Lessons Learned in Social Networking Sites and Addiction. I really enjoy reading this because some of the topics they dive into they highlight and dive into some misconceptions when people think of social media addiction or social networking sites. So I'm just gonna briefly talk about the main 10 lessons learned, but if you are watching this and you have time, I would also recommend reading the article. It's not super long, but it's informative, and so I do recommend it. The first one: social networking and social media use are not the same. From my understanding of the article, social media is a part of social networking, but social networking is not a part of social media. Next one: social networking is eclectic. Social networking is a way of being. Both of these speak to your persona on how you are online, and the way you would like to conduct yourself, the way and what you would like to interact with is very tailored to who you are as a person, who you want to be as a person. Number 4, individuals can become addicted to using social networking sites. As we talked about in this presentation, social media addiction is a real thing, and so you can become addicted, especially if you are constantly wanting to know what's happening, if you're constantly wanting to check your notifications. The next one is Facebook addiction is only one example of SNS addiction. I thought that this was interesting that they the person added this, but I guess it was important to make that distinction that Facebook is not the only social media out there. There's a lot of different social medias. Now, the next one, fear of missing out may be a part of SNS addiction. One thing that I read in the article was talking about when you are online, you are able to find people that share the same interest as you, especially if you are a person that in the real world maybe feel excluded a lot. When you are online, you get to connect with people that are like you, that have the same interest in you, and you can feel included. And so when you are not online, you are missing out on that inclusion. The next one, smartphone addiction may be part of SNS addiction, social networking site addiction. And that's partly because most people, when they are on social media or social networking sites, they're using their phone. Nomophobia may be a part of social networking site addiction. There are social demographic differences in social networking sites addiction. There are methodological problems with research. Okay. And that brings us to our conclusion. So, in conclusion, it is clear that social networking sites can lead to addiction. So, it's essential to understand the potential risks and to be mindful of the amount of time spent online. Taking proactive steps to reduce usage can be beneficial. It's important to remember that online activity should be balanced with other activities such as physical activity, social engagement, and hobbies. Seeking help, like talking to a therapist, seeking mental help. It could also be beneficial if you have a severe addiction. And so, yeah. Lastly, it's important to prioritize self-care and to practice self-care strategies to stay happy and healthy. I believe that social media is a really cool and awesome thing. It just comes down to how you use it. And I believe that using too much can have negative impacts, as we have seen in the studies that I've mentioned in this presentation. So my questions that I have many questions. I was actually struggling with what do I ask, how do I word them, but I nailed it down to these two questions. The first one is, how do we move forward with the emerging findings of social media addiction in teens? What do we do with the information? The next is, social media has become increasingly popular. If social media is a normal way to interact with one another, could that indicate that most users will be, or are they already, addicted? So I'm very curious to see how people respond to this presentation, and specifically the questions. Like I said, it's a very interesting topic for myself. That's why I chose the topic, and I also know that other people are interested in this topic as well. Thank you so much for your time. I hope that you enjoyed. And here are the references that I share with you guys throughout the video. Thank you.